Yeah, thank you, Mav, and it's great to be here and to kind of do a kind of a bonus call this week here. I'm actually looking really forward to it because joining me on today's call is Rhett from Gravita, and I've had the actual pleasure of meeting Rhett a couple of times for it. And Rhett, would you mind coming on and telling us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the Gravita protocol?
Hey, yeah. Thanks so much for having me, and great to chat with you both again. Yeah, so a little bit about me. I founded Gravita. We've been working on it since kind of mid last year, actually. So been working for a little bit now, and yeah. So just very quick background on me. Before kind of coming into crypto full time, I was data scientist at a software company. Loved my job, but loved crypto more. And and then since coming into crypto, I've done some professional asset management as well as building Gravita. So yeah, that's just a real quick background.
Yeah, and so now what is Gravita, right? I mean, I understand a little bit about it. I know we've had a chance to talk, but I still don't think I fully grasped what it is, even though I've listened to your Launchpad episode with Whack. I thought it was excellent, and I've played around with it, had a chance to talk to some of the devs about this thing here, but I'm kind of hoping in today's call you can kind of walk us through from the very beginning. So at the very fundamental level, what is Gravita?
Yeah, so great question, and I'm going to give just a slight kind of back history on this for anyone who hasn't followed this space of DeFi as closely. So the first protocol of this kind, what I call protocol to peer lending platforms, was MakerDAO. So you deposit ETH and then other assets and mint DAI. MakerDAO, I think, was a huge breakthrough, and I think it was kind of the first thing that got me really excited about DeFi back in the day before it even launched. Um, since then, we think that Liquidity made a lot of improvements to that model, the protocol to peer lending model. So it liquidates assets in a more efficient manner, and so that allows you to give better loan to value terms. So you'll notice on Liquidity, you can um, you can borrow more against a given dollar amount of ETH than you could on MakerDAO, and that's partly facilitated by their really efficient liquidation system. And then they also pioneered this kind of zero interest borrowing situation where you pay a one-time fee and then you pay zero interest after that forever. Our system is modeled on the Liquidity system. So in fact, we're a friendly fork of Liquidity. So to borrow from our protocol, you deposit ETH or your LST. Our ETH is actually the asset that has had the most borrowing in our system so far, which we love. So you deposit our ETH, you mint GRI, and then you can do what you would like with that GRI. And then in order to get your collateral back, you have to pay back the GRI with the fee. Now, a quick note on that fee. So in Liquidity, you pay a one-time 0.5% upfront, then 0%. We do the same, only we kind of stretch that one-time fee over 6 months. We'll basically give you a pro rata rebate if you close early, just so that it's a better experience for both long and short-term borrowers. So hopefully that kind of puts us in context of some of these others. And one of the main differences between us and Liquidity is they just allow you to borrow against ETH, whereas we're multi-collateral. So you can still borrow against ETH. You can borrow against right now just rETH and stETH for LSTs, and then also BLUSD, which is a special case that we don't maybe need to get into as much here. But it's really kind of multi-collateral and focused on liquid stake tokens like rETH.
Okay, let me have you walk through that a little slower for me, just so because it seems at first glance too good to be true, right? But so let me see if I'm understanding it correctly here. If I have some rETH, and I'll just throw out a nice number of 100 just to make it easy for discussion here. I wish I had 100 rETH, right? But let's say I have a 100 rETH, right? Instead of selling that asset, right, and paying tax obligations for making that transaction, I can post that as collateral with Gravita, right? And so when I deposit that, there isn't an interest on the loan. Instead, I'm given what I'll call maybe a loan origination fee. and you talked about a little bit of the nuance that it's not just charged at one time; it's streamed over a period of 6 months. Maybe we can talk about that in a little bit. But once I deposit that 100 rETH, what how much can I borrow, and what do I get in return? What token do I get back?
Yeah, good question. So, you deposit rETH, and in order to borrow, you mint the debt token of our system, which is called Grai. So think of it as our version of Liquidy's LUSD or MakerDAO's DAI. So that's the asset that you borrow. And for rETH, you can borrow up to 85 cents on the dollar. You wouldn't want to borrow right up to that level because then even a slight price fluctuation in rETH would have you liquidated. But you think of that as your buffer level. So you say, okay, I really, instead of wanting to borrow 85 cents on the dollar, I want to borrow 50 cents on the dollar, and then I have this buffer before I could get in trouble with respect to my loan being liquidatable. So yeah, you mint Grai, which is our debt token, and then in order to get your collateral back, you pay back the Grai you minted plus the borrow fee, essentially. Well, technically, the borrow fee is paid up front, so either you pay back the full amount, and then you may, depending on when you close, you may get a rebate, a partial rebate on the mint fee that you paid.
Okay, and maybe that's good to talk about that rebate and kind of the streaming of the fee, right? So you charge this 0.5% loan origination fee, but I guess that's only fully 0.5% if I keep my loan outstanding more than 6 months. Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah. So you pay it up front, and it's just, so we're very clear, it's 0.5% of the borrow. It's not 0.5% of the collateral.
Okay.
So if you borrow 100,000 Grai, it would be 0.5% of that. And a system like Liquidy's, because it's a one-time fee, the longer you hold open the loan, the lower your effective APR. The same will be true for us. But the downside to Liquidy, and there's not many, they're a really great system, is that if you really only wanted to borrow for a week or two, and there's some people who do want to do that, it's not really competitive with Aave. Liquidy becomes competitive at like 3 months or more. So our goal is to be an attractive place for both the long and the short-term borrower.
Okay. So if I'm looking just short term, you're probably not the protocol, but if I'm looking medium range, 3, 4, 5 months, then I would just pay a prorated amount of that loan origination fee, that 0.5%. If I'm looking at holding a loan out for 3 years, 4 years, longer like that, then the only cost that's incurred is that loan origination fee of 0.5%.
Yeah, let me clarify one thing, sorry. Liquidy, since you pay the full fee regardless of duration, Liquidy is one that I would like consider your timing. Since ours is streamed, we feel like we're a pretty competitive place for both long and short term. So whereas Liquidy is more of a long term, hey, if you're borrowing for 3 months or more, go to Liquidy if you're wanting to borrow against ETH specifically. But in our case, a 0.5% charged over 6 months is roughly a 1% APR. So for the short-term borrower, that's very competitive with Aave. And then for the long-term borrower, you never pay any interest ever again. And so if you're someone who wanted to hold a loan open for 5 years or something, then it's extremely compelling, if that makes sense. So we think that was, Liquidy's great, but not for the super short-term borrower, whereas Gravita is still attractive as a short-term borrower.
Oh, excellent. Okay, I follow now. That even because of the streaming, even a short-term loan, because most of the loan origination fee is going to be rebated if I only hold the loan out for a few days, I'm going to get a very competitive rate.
Exactly, yeah. And we think both types of borrowers have a place in our system. So if you're a person who likes to, periodically take leverage for a week or two at a time, and you're doing that on Aave, this is a place to price compare. And then if you're a person who wants to open up a really safe loan and hold it open for 5 years, then this is an extremely low cost way to do that.
Okay. And so now let's talk a little bit about the liquidation risks, being relatively new to DeFi myself. So let's say that changing the scenario just slightly here, let's say I deposit $100,000 US dollars worth of rETH into the protocol. And I guess it could get liquidated if my borrow amount exceeds 85% of the value of the rETH, right? Is that the liquidation threshold is 85%, or is it higher?
Exactly. Yep, that's right. It's 85%. Okay. So if at time one you took $100,000 worth and borrowed 85,000, you'd be right at the threshold. And then if rETH dropped in price, you'd be liquidated basically immediately. So yep.
Is there some safe loan to value ratio, I guess it would be called, that it would not get liquidated under? Is there some like 71% number or something like that as long as I'm below there is no risk of liquidation?
Oh, yes. Okay, so 71% is an interesting. So yeah, let me clarify that. So under normal circumstances, the liquidation price is at 85% loan to value. But if the entire system gets less collateralized than is optimal, the system can go into what's known as recovery mode, at which point anyone who has a loan to value above 71% roughly can be partially liquidated. Our goal is to keep the system ever from going into recovery mode, but you want to keep an eye on that as like a special case. So if you saw that the total system health was not great, so like if all of the borrowers against rETH had an aggregate loan to value of 70%, so we're nearing recovery mode, you'd want to leave a bigger buffer. Now, and so that's the worst LTV, loan to value, that you could ever be liquidated at, is that 71%, but under normal circumstances, it's 85. Now there's this other question of like, hey, where could I go to never get liquidated? Well, that would kind of depend on your view of what's the lowest price rETH could ever get to. So for some people who want to take just light levered exposure to something and say, hey, I want it way below the threshold of what I ever think rETH could get to, you just kind of need to choose what that number would be and say, hey, I'm going to borrow so little, for instance, I'm going to go slightly levered long, but I'm going to borrow so little that rETH would have to hit $100 to get liquidated. I don't think that'll ever happen. So I'm not going to, be concerned about liquidation risk.
Okay. So I put in $100,000. Let's say I'd be very conservative and I only want to borrow, $60,000. So I'm at a 60% loan to value, gives me some room for fluctuation. Hopefully I stay below that 71%, but I'll keep an eye on it, make certain it doesn't go to 85%, right? And I got in return $60,000 worth of the GRI token. Now, what do I do with it? How do I cash that out if I want dollars or USDC? How do I redeem that GRI for something that I can spend?
Yeah, great question. So there's a few different ways to use it, and I'll just talk through a few of those. One is, hey, I'm a person who wants to take leverage, or I want to buy a $60,000 car with that 60K. In those cases, you want to swap out of the GRI. So you would go to one of the DEX pools. So currently there's a Uniswap pool with GRI and USDC in it. There's a Maverick pool with GRI and LUSD, and there's also a GRI ETH pool on Uniswap. So you'd go to an aggregator probably actually, or you go to one of those pools and you'd swap GRI into say USDC. And then if you wanted to take leverage, you'd then swap that USDC into say rETH. Now you have levered exposure to rETH. Or if you wanted to make a real world purchase, obviously you just off ramp that USDC. But there's another thing that you can do with it, which is if you mint some GRI and you say, hey, I don't actually really want to take a lot of leverage or make a real world purchase, you can turn around and deposit it into our stability pool. And the way that works is when someone gets over levered and gets liquidated, your GRI is pro rata burned to cover their debt. And then you're receiving their collateral pro rata. And because of the 85% loan to value, if someone gets liquidated on rETH, you just at that moment converted a portion of your GRI into rETH at a 15% market discount. So that's one thing you can do if you don't want to swap out of it. But if you do, just go to a DEX.
Okay. And then what keeps GRI worth that stability close to $1, right? If I go to a DEX and I trade it for USDC, right, I would expect some type of depreciation or loss of value of the GRI token. How does it quote maintain its peg, or how does it remain close to $1?
Yeah, great question. So there's some soft mechanisms and there's some hard mechanisms. So a lot of these systems, like you look at the various what we call CDP systems, right? MakerDAO, Abracadabra, Liquidity, etc. All of them have the soft mechanism of, hey, if I'm a person who opened a loan when GRI was at $1, and then I see that the price fell to 95 cents, well, I can swap back into GRI and pay back, and I just got a free 5% debt forgiveness. Because our system internally always considers GRI to be worth $1. So there's a natural arbitrage that happens there, and it happens in the opposite direction too. If since we always value GRI at $1, if it started trading at $1.08, you can basically take some collateral, mint it at $1, and sell it into the market for kind of an arbitrage on that side. So that's what I call just like a natural soft mechanism that all of these systems have. Another soft mechanism is, and we're working on some things here that we'll be announcing more later. If you can make it highly attractive for people to come provide liquidity in these DEX pools, that has a stabilizing effect. So that's a second soft mechanism. And then there are the hard mechanisms, and Liquidity was a pioneer in some of these as well. So Liquidity has this redemption function where if LUSD ever falls below $1, it becomes economically attractive for people to do this redemption where a person can buy LUSD at less than $1, and they can go over to the riskiest borrower and they can one-to-one exchange that LUSD for $1 worth of that person's collateral. It's with no penalty to the borrower. So in Liquidity, essentially the borrower's the net value of their position is unchanged, but they reduce some of their ETH exposure. So generally, you still don't want it to happen to you, but it's not the same as a liquidation. So that's this arbitrage mechanism that keeps LUSD really well hard pegged. That same redemption mechanism we have, but it's not turned on yet. We think that these systems work better if you wait to turn them on. And at least at launch, when we do turn them on, we'll basically we'll make it so that the arbitrager basically has to pay essentially a 3% fee to the person they redeem against. So they're less likely to trigger right at $1. We think that it's helpful for these systems as they grow to have a little bit of a flexibility around the dollar. So that's the hard, what you would call like a hard pegging mechanism that Liquidity pioneered, and it works really well. Just a note on that, it's an extremely effective mechanism, and you'll notice that when everything depegged during the USDC depeg, LUSD defended much faster than its peers because of these redemptions. But it's a lever that you ideally don't want to pull very often because it can be a bad experience for your riskier borrowers. So our goal is to have that in place, but to do enough work on these other soft mechanisms so that that's a lever that almost never gets pulled, ideally.
I see, and it's interesting hearing you talk for a little bit because that the GRI actually needs to maintain its peg both ways, right? It has to maintain it close to $1 and not be at a discount. But on the same flip side, it also can't trade at a premium. Otherwise, it will be more costly for somebody to repay their loan. If, let's say, they bought a car and are converting dollars back into GRI, right? They kind of want to buy that token at or near the same cost that they redeemed it for to purchase that car.
Yeah, exactly. So, and we've seen that with Liquidity, and they've been doing some things to try and solve that problem for themselves, including their chicken bonds. But during really hostile market conditions, you'll sometimes see LUSD go to $1.08 or something. And if you're trying to repay at that moment, that's some implicit borrow cost. If you're a holder of LUSD, it's an implicit gain. So some people choose to hold LUSD for those hostile market conditions because they expect it to go over peg when the market's most under threat. But there's this really kind of cool natural mechanism here where if it goes above the dollar, it's better for holders, worse for borrowers. If it goes below, it's better for borrowers, worse for holders. And if you allow a little bit of flexibility in each direction, then the system can kind of naturally arbitrage itself. Like I said, if it falls below, someone who borrowed previously can take that opportunity to buy and repay. We'll see that in some of these systems when there's a few months back when the MIM price fell to almost 90 cents, and a bunch of MIM borrowers just came in and bought it up and repaid debt, and then it came right back. And then again, there's similar natural mechanisms on the other side. So we actually think that allowing a little bit of flexibility in either direction is not the worst thing. You want to hold close to the dollar, and you want to default be there, but allowing it to move a little bit around that price is fine and pretty self-correcting in these systems.
Okay, interesting. And then recognizing you guys just launched, a week or two ago here, couple of questions for you. I guess the first one is, how did the launch go, and kind of what are your capacities? How's it going so far?
Yeah, great question. Pretty well. We've been pleased with the response. So I think I mentioned we allow borrowing against 4 assets currently, and 3 of the 4 we've set mint caps that we'll raise periodically just to help the system grow in kind of a healthy way. 3 of the 4 mint caps were reached within 24 hours after launching, rETH being one. And then we raised those, and 2 days later, and one's full again already. BLUSD filled up in about 10 minutes, and rETH is almost full as well. So we currently allow about 2.5 million worth of borrowing against rETH, and it's at like 2.3 or 2.2. So it's going well. We've been really pleased with the response from the community. And I think I mentioned earlier, rETH is the asset that's been borrowed the most against, and we're really happy about that. Really happy that we're able to serve a key need for the Rocket Pool community. So yeah, I think we're at about 13 million TVL, and working on growing that slowly. Growing it not too slowly, but we think that these systems just kind of are a little bit more stable if we can grow it in a kind of a managed way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, what do you hope your cadence to be at increasing those minting caps?
That's a good question. In the early days of growth, you really need to source people who are interested in coming and providing liquidity in those DEX pools. So that'll be kind of our limiting factor. The more people interested in doing that, the faster we'll be able to grow. But we would love to be able to raise those mint caps, on a weekly or so basis, over the next several months. And if we need to raise them even more often, we can raise them up to, once every 2 days. On raising mint caps, there's a 2-day time lock. But we'd love to just grow it as fast as that liquidity will allow for. And so far, it hasn't held us back. So we've been really appreciative of the community in that regard. But yeah, if we're able to kind of raise those mint caps by $1 million or so a week, every week for the next several months, that would be a pretty healthy cadence. And it's possible we could grow a little faster than that, just depending on some of these factors.
And has there been much like integration in the DeFi industry? Like, for instance, I know with like another protocol like DeFi Saver, you can have kind of these applications that watch your LTV value and try to prevent liquidations on your collateral. Are there such tools created yet for Gravita, or are those to be coming?
To be coming, and we're working hard to partner with all of the various tool creators. So DeFi Saver is a really awesome one. I've been talking with them since before we launched, and we're like, yeah, we would love to work with you guys, and uh, you know, they sound like they're excited and interested as well. So some of those things, tools and things will come from external parties, which we love. And yeah, looking to work with any of these, high quality other platforms that'll bring more utility to Gravita users. But right now, it's there are fewer of those, and then obviously a lot more integrations come as we can show a little bit of traction. So we're working on, DeFi Saver, and we've talked with B Protocol. There's a really cool integration they have with Liquidity that we think would bring a lot of value to our users. And then lots more out there. That's one great thing about DeFi is how composable it is, and we would love to work with lots of different teams.
Yeah, I wonder if we could circle back now in the conversation and talk about two things. You mentioned just briefly the stability pool on how
Mm-hmm.
users restake their GRI token to potentially earn part of the liquidations. Can you explain just a little bit more about how that works?
Yes, absolutely. By the way, while I'm speaking, Maverick, if you want to invite Fornax up to speak as well, he leads smart contracts, and he'll be able to jump into some of these things as well. Might as well just get him on stage. But yeah, so the way the stability pool works is it takes in GRI. So right now there's a little bit less than 4 million GRI in that pool. And when someone hits a liquidation threshold, a liquidator can trigger the liquidation, and they get paid a small fee to do so. They get paid 200 GRI basically to cover the gas. Plus, they get paid 0.5% of the collateral. And then the rest, since it's this GRI in the stability pool that burns the debt, the stability pool participants, their GRI in that pool is pro rata burned, and then they capture the collateral. So to give it like a simple example, if you comprise the entire stability pool, say you put 100,000 GRI in there, and I had borrowed 100,000 GRI and on some amount of rETH, and then I hit my liquidation threshold, someone would trigger the liquidation, and then your 100,000 GRI would burn my entire debt, and you would capture all of my collateral at a 15% market discount. If instead there were you with 100,000 GRI in there and one other user with 100,000 GRI, each of you would be burning half of that person's debt and capturing half of their collateral. So you would have, at moment one, you have 100,000 GRI in there. At moment two, you have 50,000 GRI, and then half of that person's collateral at a, like I said, at a market discount roughly equal to their max loan to value.
Oh, excellent, excellent. And yeah, I invite others if you have questions too to just simply kind of raise your hand here, and we could invite you up on stage to have you ask questions on it too. I have a couple remaining though on my agenda here. One of those is what happens to that 5% borrowing fee? Is that what funds the protocol, or is that somehow returned into the stability pool? Where does that go?
Great question. Just to clarify, it's not 5%, it's
Oh, yeah,
0.5%. So it's half a percent. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No worries. Yeah, so let me first tell you what Liquidity does with theirs is they have a staking contract for LQTY, where you throw LQTY into that pool, and then all those protocol revenues are just paid to you. You could call it like a dividend-like contract. Our governance token is not live yet, and a contract like that is obviously can't be live. So for the foreseeable future, our plan is to reinvest those protocol revenues into the growth of the system. So growing a system like this is pretty challenging. You have to, like I mentioned, you have to source a lot of people willing to provide liquidity in order to kind of facilitate the growth of the system in the early days until you reach escape velocity. And so what we'll be doing with that protocol revenue is just turning around and reinvesting it into the growth and health of the system. So things like giving incentives to liquidity providers and things like that. Over time, when we launch the token, et cetera, we'll be handing over the governance of the system to the DAO, and then the DAO will be able to decide what's done with those protocol revenues. But yeah, for the short term, they will just simply be reinvested into the growth and health of the system.
Excellent. Well, we actually have the first question here. Wack has come up to the stage and wants to ask some questions, I'm guessing.
Hi, Ken, thank you for having me on, Mav, for hosting the call, and Rhett, of course, thank you so much for coming here and giving us all the opportunity to ask you some questions. You know that I've been a huge supporter of the work that you've been doing so far, and a champion and evangelist for the work that you guys have been doing. I'm so excited about everything. I really want to take this opportunity to address some of the controversies that are around Gravita. I think it's a really good idea to just get them out there, discuss it all, and deal with it and kind of move on in a sense, or kind of keep that conversation open. As some of you might know, there have been some people on Twitter who kind of posit themselves as people who want to champion certain values in crypto, and they've been kind of poking some barbs towards Gravita for a few days now. I don't want to mention names. I'm sure people can guess who that person is. But do you have any thing you'd like to say about some of the things that they've brought up in their criticisms, and would you like to address any of that here?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Wack. Really appreciate it, and have loved all our interactions. I'll mention a few things, then Fornax can jump in as well. So there's a few things that it's important for our users to note from a risk perspective, and I'm just going to name a few of them and kind of address this as part of that. So one is we're obviously new. We've approached things in a way that is as careful as we can be. We started with really battle-tested code. We've had 3 security audits, but there is risk associated with newness, always. So that's an important thing. Secondly, for us to kind of serve our purpose, we were not able to launch immutable contracts. So there is upgradability in Gravita. And, this is something to also take note of, where liquidity is fully immutable. The LQTY token is a non-governance token because there's nothing to govern. We are mutable, and our goal is to become much more hardened over time as we can, but we felt like we needed to be able to have that ability to improve some of our mechanisms over time before hardening. And there's likely to always remain some level of governance because we'll need to be able to onboard new collateral types, etc. So that's something to note as well. We're not immutable like liquidity. And there's obviously risk that comes with that as well. And then lastly, some of these people on Twitter have mentioned a few functions that I'll just speak to briefly. So we obviously have the ability to upgrade our contracts. And we also have some functionality in the system that will be used to facilitate layer 2 deployments, which will basically be able to allow a whitelisted contract to mint some GRI to basically seed liquidity into our L2 instances. That's something that if you had a rogue team could be problematic. So what we do to mitigate that is we have a very large multi-sig with both team members and some trusted members of the community that is required to be signed before a contract is whitelisted and before we do upgrades. So that's an important thing. And then we really only allow contracts to mint from that contract rather than, just, us just minting and sending to a wallet and doing with it as we would like. But those are things that are worth noting. Our goal is to be fully transparent here. So publishing our audits that speak about some of these things is really important. And then just openly engaging with the community. Another quick note on that, we actually have a few different multi-sigs. One that has just some team members on it for lower stakes things like raising mint caps. And then this larger multi-sig with time locks. All of them have time locks, but this larger multi-sig, like I said, has a much higher required number of signers, and it requires us to get signers outside of the Gravita team from trusted members of the community. So those are things just to take note of and to assess them as part of your own risk assessment. Fornax, you can add to that if you'd like.
Yes, of course. First of all, it's a pleasure being here. Thanks for having me, Ken, Mav, and the Rocket Pool community, and lots of faces that I know here from the community. Regarding immutability, when we started designing the system, we really liked the idea of making everything immutable, and because I think that's a very solid design on the liquidity product. It attracts a lot of. It is a very positive thing. So we really we're considering that for Gravita as well. But Rocket Pool community, I think you really are close to this topic because, well, if Rocket Pool was launched in immutable, it would be a really, really different thing from what it is today, right? And we believe that Web3 and staking products and products like Gravita, that we really have a lot of new development, new solutions that are coming around. So I think it would be really too soon to ossify on even if it's a very nice solution. I don't think we are at a level that it is positive to ossify a product. So we switched to this upgradable choice where it is protected by a multi-sig with not only team members but also some other prominent team community members from Gravita, and that allows us to increase our product, to improve it, and at some point in the future, there is always the option to say, hey, okay, now we have delivered everything we had inside our minds for Gravita. I think we have now accomplished all of that, and we can just disable upgradability. So it's not like we can't, like we need always to have the immutable contracts. We can at some point convert and still have that same benefit of, okay, now those contracts are ossified and they won't be changed anymore.
Great, thank you very much, Fornax.
Thank you so much for answering that question, guys. I appreciate it.
And Wack, any other questions from your end? That was an excellent question. I don't think I'm hearing any more questions from Wack there, but yeah, thank you very much for that. And I guess it does kind of beg one more question. You kind of hinted at a couple of things, maybe L2s, maybe a native token, but what are the future plans for Gravita?
That is a very great question. Yeah, so a few things. L2s are an obvious one. I think probably most people in Ethereum are on the same page here, but we feel like we'll be a better steward of the Ethereum blockchain if we can help attract up the liquidity of these LSTs and assets to be used on the layer 2s so that we can kind of make Ethereum more of just the settlement layer. So deploying onto high quality L2s is really important for us and high priority. We think that it's also, we would prefer to be able to reach all users who are interested, and gas fees on Ethereum just are not always tenable for all users. So that's a really big one. I think, you guys have seen a few hints. We're also exploring node operator loans. And so that could be someone who's a solo staker or someone who's a Rocket Pool mini pool operator. We would love to be able to reduce some of the trade-offs that node operation has to allow someone to be able to, in a safe way, borrow against the assets in their nodes. So that's another one. And then there's a few others that I'll just mention briefly. Onboarding additional collateral types is important, but part of that will be LP collateral. So say you're not just an rETH holder, but you're providing liquidity between rETH and ETH on Balancer, Curve, wherever. We would love to be able to facilitate that as a collateral type for you as well. And then one other thing that we feel is pretty important. There's a lot of DeFi users out there who, don't want to be constantly watching their positions and worried about if they're going to get liquidated on some position, and a lot maybe who don't even want to take net leverage. And for those users, we're developing some managed vaults, and the idea here is, okay, you just deposit your rETH. The vault will mint a certain loan to value of GRI against it. It will take that GRI and use it productively, earning yield, either in the stability pool or stable swap pool or in the future elsewhere. And then, it will manage the debt ratio automatically. So, okay, if the rETH price starts falling, it'll pull some of that GRI back and manage the loan to value. So that product is more for the person who's like, hey, I don't want to have to manage this myself, nor do I want to take leverage. I just want to, add an additional layer of productivity to my assets. That's who that kind of product will be focused on. There's some other things we're thinking about as well, but that's like high level of some of the key things we're thinking about for the near term future.
Oh, excellent. And I do invite anyone else that has questions here, as we have a few minutes remaining at the end here, to just raise your hand and come forward, ask to speak, or if you're in the trading channel, you can post it in there. But we wait for somebody to come forward here. Fornex or Rhett, are there any things that we didn't cover in today's call that you feel it's important for users to know about Gravita, especially individuals from the Rocket Pool community?
We have on our roadmap a few features that are being designed for the Rocket Pool community, as allowing a node operator to use their node as collateral to borrow against their node. So that is definitely being considered for the future. Let me see, do you have anything in mind, Rhett?
A couple of things I'll highlight while we wait for questions is just, I would love to just briefly touch on some of the ways that you can use the system as it is. So obviously, I think a few of the use cases are obvious of, hey, I want to make a real world purchase, so but I don't want to sell my rETH, so I mint some GRI, swap it out and buy a skateboard or whatever. Or someone who wants to take leverage, hey, I use rETH to mint GRI, swap that back into rETH and add some leverage. A few other things that I think are just worth noting. One is, okay, you can mint and deposit in the stability pool, and that's a thing where you're going to likely capture liquidations in adverse market conditions. So you can mint and deposit into there. Or if you're a person who says, hey, I have stable coins that I want to DC into ETH when the market starts dipping. One way to do that is you swap your USDC into GRI, deposit in the stability pool, and just leave it there. And it'll probably be relatively inactive during good market conditions, but during very volatile market conditions, you'll start converting that GRI into ETH and LSTs. So that's another way you can use the system. And then the last one, and this is the way I tend to use these systems more myself. If you're a person who holds rETH and you hold stablecoins, one thing you can do is you can come in, mint some GRI against your rETH, and then just match it up to, say, your USDC or your LUSD in one of our DEX pools. And now you're just using those assets productively, but you have no net leverage. You can always pull back that GRI and pay down debt if the market conditions worsen. And so it's an approach that the more kind of conservative user may be attracted to. And when doing so, I'd suggest taking a pretty conservative loan to value, so you don't have to worry about if ETH drops 10% overnight, getting liquidated in the middle of the night or something like that. So those are some of the things that the more conservative users can do. And then the more aggressive users that want to take a lot of net leverage, that's okay too. We're not here to tell you what to do, but just thought I'd highlight a few of those.
Yeah, no, those are actually really great. I kind of feel like, being somebody who's still learning quite a bit about DeFis and all these, I call it advanced integration strategies. I'd really like to see some advanced workshops or know-hows on how to take somebody from a DeFi noob like myself into somebody who's doing some unique and potentially rewarding integrations.
Yeah, we'll give some write-ups on that, maybe even do some videos, and would love to even do just kind of community, workshops. I can, share my screen and walk through some of these workflows, et cetera. Would love to just be a resource to the community in walking through these various ways. I've talked to people before who have made the comment that, CDP platforms are just there for the degens to go max levered. And I strongly disagree. I actually think it's a really interesting place where both the conservative and the less conservative users have kind of a symbiotic relationship with each other, and so it can be a great place for either kind of user. And then depending on your profile, will determine which of these strategies makes the most sense.
Yeah, kind of figure out where you are in the spectrum of risk appetite there. There is a question that did come through trading here from Invisible Ninja Guy here. Can you talk a little bit more about that proposal to use your node as collateral? How would that work?
Fornax, you want to take that one?
Sure. We still don't have anything written in stone. We're really going through possibilities, and it is a feature that we really want to provide for the Rocketpool community, but we still didn't decide the path that we're going. We could, one of the paths that we're considering, we would have to wait for forced exits to be enabled on the Ethereum protocol, so that we could just consider that as a regular loan, and at some point, if price goes down, we could use the forced exits to liquidate that position that is related to the node. That is one possible scenario, but that will have to wait for those upgrades for Ethereum to allow for the forced exits of validators. Another possibility we're considering is making a non-liquidatable scenario, non-liquidatable loan. But the node would be, the user would have to switch their withdrawal address to a contract address that is controlled by the Gravita Protocol. And not having a risk of being liquidated, it's a very positive thing for one side, but we would maybe have to allow only a more conservative amount of loan to value against those kinds of non-liquidable positions. And also we could consider the rewards that the nodes receive, like the RPL rewards, to be received by this contract and automatically be repaying their debt. So that is an interesting scenario as well. There are some other options, but we could also make an integration with DVT and form use DVT with the node operator and maybe Gravita or maybe some other third party that is neutral, and coordinate a liquidation in a way that you could just switch the owners of that DVT. But yeah, that is multiple scenarios that we can consider, but we still don't have anything settled. And we would like to hear from the community if anyone has some feedback on those scenarios. We'd love to hear them.
Yeah, well, thank you, Fornax, for, I mean, I can't think of anyone more capable of trying to understand how an integration might work other than you, and hopefully that answers SNG's question very well. But you do raise kind of a good question to maybe end with here as we kind of reach the end of the hour here, which is, if any individual listening to this or from the Rocket Pool community wants to get a hold of you two and ask questions either about the protocol or perhaps a future integration of using a Rocket Pool mini pool as collateral on the Gravita, what's the best way to get a hold of you? How can they follow you?
For me, obviously, you have my Twitter here that I'm on, and then we spend a lot of time on Discord. We have a Discord server. You can find a link to our official Gravita Twitter account. And yeah, I would love to have you, any of you jump over and ask us questions, or, also raise concerns, etc. Give us user feedback. We love that. And we'll also try to be proactive about it as well, and hop over and join the Rocket Pool community in your Discord often, and engage with you there as well.
Yeah, same for me. For any questions, you can send messages here on Twitter or on Discord, on the Rocket Pool server, or on our Gravita server. I'm very active on both of them. Looking forward to answering all the questions that you might have.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you both for coming on. I think this has been one of our more in-depth discussions for it, but it sounds like an absolutely fascinating. I hope that those listening to the call here had a chance to learn a little bit about Gravita, and are at least intrigued enough to go out and do some more research and perhaps explore the protocol a little bit. Both Rhett and Fornax, thank you very much for being on today's episode.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And quick reminder, we've got another space starting in about 1 hour's time. See you then.